Now, bombing is continuing in the northern Syrian city of Afrin after Turkey announced that it had seized control from Kurdish forces with the help of its Syrian rebel allies. This map shows how Turkish forces have surrounded Afrin after a 2-month battle. It's thought that nearly 300 civilians have died in that time. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry says that thousands of people are leaving the rebel-held enclave of eastern Ghouta as Syrian government forces, backed by Russia, push into the area. Nearly 12 million civilians have been forced from their homes since the civil war began 7 years ago. Well, with me is Rania Abouzeid, a journalist with over 15 years' experience in the Middle East, author of the book No Turning Back: Life, Loss and Hope in Wartime Syria. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
You have documented the story of Syria over many years. You spent a lot of time with rebel groups. Just talk us through what you saw.
I covered Syria from the first protests in early February, March 2011 until 2016, the end of 2016, early 2017. And that period is documented in my book, but it's told through the people of stories. And you don't see them for a minute or for a moment or for a battle, but you see them over the 6 years.
And within those rebel groups, there are many distinct identities, as you say. So there are jihadi militants from people who are, you say, secular. Again, talk me through how those rebel groups are now being organised.
Well, they continue to form coalitions that then melt and form other coalitions. Groups have changed names many times. It's a very fluid battlefield. And as you say, the rebels incorporate, they're a very wide spectrum from relatively secular all the way up to Islamist groups. And then you have the Al-Qaeda groups and until recently Islamic State as well. So it's a very complicated battlefield.
And presumably talking to those extreme groups was very difficult, was it?
It was very difficult. Had to do it very carefully, but I did it over years and it's documented in the book.
Can you give me an example of some of the people that you spoke to from IS or AQ, for example?
Well, the book talks about 3 Al-Qaeda members, and one of them was in the inner circle of the leadership. And he documents, for the first time in some cases, new information about the split between Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. The book is underpinned by a rigorous investigation into the arming and the Islamization of the uprising. So I take you into the meetings with the Saudis, the Qataris, the Turks, the Americans, and I show you what happened. So there's a lot of new information in the book. And part of it ties to the Islamization of the uprising and what happened when they split between Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, how that played out in the leadership circle and also on the ground.
So what can you say in a nutshell what you found in terms of what the external money, for example, or backing that was coming into those groups?
The rebel supporters, the Saudis, the Qataris, the Turks, the Americans, the Europeans, the British, were often at cross purposes when it came to supporting the rebellion. So they effectively fragmented the same forces that they claimed publicly they wanted to unite.
And when you also asked the question, I think, about what now about IS fighters who've perhaps lain low. Do you think there are sleeper cells? Do you think it will re-emerge in a different form?
Defeating Islamic State on the battlefield is one thing, but defeating the ideology and the reasons for its rise is a very different battle, and that war remains to be won.
In terms of the future of Syria and Assad, you make the point that it is now not something that the Syrians can determine themselves because there are so many international players. Where do you see this going?
I think that the outcome for all intents and purposes has been decided in the sense that Assad isn't going anywhere. He even calls for him to go anywhere. We no longer hear those calls. So he will remain in Syria and he is gaining territory, he's gaining ground as we saw from the battle in eastern Ghouta. But the war is by no means over. People are still dying, they're still being displaced and territory is still changing hands.
Okay, I'm sorry we're out of time, but thanks very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you.
And Rania Abouzeid, your book is out now, I think, isn't it?
Thank you, yes.